Hello, my friend. Tonight we delve into something truly extraordinary, something that might just make your ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics pop right off the tomb walls. Tonight, we embark on a journey to the very heart of power, spirituality, and utterly mind-bending personal lives within the most revered dynasty of the ancient world, the Pharaohs of Egypt. You're about to discover the most unbelievable sexual practices that shaped their rule, their religion, and arguably, their very genetics. Just imagine you're standing at the edge of the sprawling Nile, the sun, a fiery orb sinking behind the towering pyramids, and the air, thick with the scent of lotus blossoms and untold secrets. You feel a strange hum under your bare feet, a whisper from the millennia pulling you deeper into the past. You probably won't survive this deep dive into royal bedrooms without at least a few polite gasps, maybe even a dropped jaw or two. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might think you know about ancient Egypt, the grand monuments, the glittering treasures, the mummies wrapped in linen, but beneath the familiar gold masks and the serene depictions of gods lies a world of human desires, rituals, and practices that would make even the most progressive modern minds pause. Forget everything you thought you knew about traditional monarchies and their quaint little royal affairs. The pharaohs operated on an entirely different plane. We're talking about a civilization where the king wasn't just a ruler, he was a living god, a direct descendant of the sun god Ra, and his every action, even in the most private chambers, held cosmic significance. This isn't just about what they did in bed, it's about why they did it, and how those actions were intricately woven into the very fabric of their religious beliefs and their understanding of the universe. You are stepping into a worldview where the personal was inextricably linked to the divine, where the pharaoh's virility wasn't merely a matter of personal pride, but a cosmic necessity. Think about it. In our world, privacy is often seen as a fundamental right, especially concerning intimate matters. But for a pharaoh, life was an open book to the gods, and often to their subjects. Every breath, every decision, and yes, every union was a performance on the grand stage of eternity. You might feel a little squirmy at some of the things you'll hear, but remember, you're viewing these practices through the lens of a completely different cultural context, a world where the lines between human and divine were wonderfully, sometimes frighteningly blurred. Historians still argue whether some of these practices were literal, everyday occurrences or primarily symbolic, grand gestures meant to reinforce the pharaoh's divine status. But one thing is certain. They were deeply embedded in the royal narrative. Take, for instance, the very concept of divine genesis as understood by the Egyptians. Their creation myth wasn't some abstract philosophical concept. It was a vibrant, almost tactile story of how the world came to be, and it set a rather unconventional precedent for the pharaohs. You see, the Egyptians believed that in the very beginning, there was only a watery abyss, a primordial soup called Nun. From this chaos, a single mound of earth, the Benben stone, rose, and upon it stood the self-created god Atum. Now, how did Atum create the world, you ask? He didn't just snap his fingers. Oh no, that would be far too mundane for the ancient Egyptians. Atum, in a burst of divine energy and perhaps a moment of supreme loneliness, self-generated. He either coughed up or, more famously and fascinatingly, masturbated the first pair of gods into existence. Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. Yes, you heard that right. The very act of creation, the very beginning of the cosmos as they knew it, sprang from a divine autoerotic act. This isn't some fringe belief held by a few eccentric priests. This was a foundational myth taught to every child, understood by every farmer, and most importantly, mirrored by every pharaoh. For you, the pharaoh, were not just a king. You were the living embodiment of Atum, the divine creator, walking the earth. Your own generative power was a direct reflection of this primordial act. So, when you, as Pharaoh, engaged in certain practices, you weren't just fulfilling personal desires, you were reenacting the very act of creation, ensuring the cosmic order and the continued existence of the world. It's a bit like believing that every time you make a sandwich, you're actually recreating the Big Bang, just with more lettuce. A quirky thought, right? This powerful link between the pharaoh's virility and divine creation meant that the royal bedchamber wasn't just a place for procreation, it was a sacred space, a stage for ritualistic acts designed to maintain the fertility of the Nile, the prosperity of the land, and the stability of the entire kingdom. The waters of the Nile, which brought life to their desert landscape, were seen as directly influenced by the pharaoh's own potency. If the pharaoh was strong and virile, then the Nile would flow abundantly, the crops would flourish, and Egypt would thrive. It was a pressure cooker of expectation, where your personal performance had national, even global implications. You couldn't just have an off day. The fate of the harvest literally depended on you. Imagine the stress of having an entire civilization counting on your performance. It puts performance review in a whole new light, doesn't it? So, the stage is set. You, the pharaoh, are a living god, descended from a self-pleasuring creator deity, and your intimate life is a cosmic ballet. What kind of unbelievable sexual practices would logically flow from such a worldview? Well, you're about to find out, and let me tell you, it gets even more fascinating. So, you're the pharaoh, and the divine act of creation started with Atum's personal contribution. This wasn't just a quaint story, it was a blueprint. You, as the earthly manifestation of that divine power, were expected to emulate it. And here's where things take a truly unbelievable turn. This emulation often extended to incest. Yes, you heard that right. While most societies throughout history have viewed incest with varying degrees of taboo and repulsion, for the Egyptian royal family, it was not only tolerated but, in many cases, actively encouraged and even seen as a sacred duty. Now, before you recoil and ask, wait, what? Let's dive into the why. This wasn't about some ancient version of reality television drama or a lack of options in the dating pool. This was deeply, profoundly religious. The pharaohs believed they were not merely human rulers but living gods, direct descendants of a divine lineage. To preserve the purity of this divine bloodline, they felt it was essential to marry within the closest possible family circle. Think of it less as a social custom and more as a spiritual necessity, a way to keep the sacred essence of godhood from being diluted by mortal blood. It was a bit like trying to protect a secret recipe for eternal life by only letting family members taste it. A peculiar form of quality control, wouldn't you say? The most compelling precedent for this practice came directly from their mythology, the story of Osiris and Isis. You'll remember Osiris, the benevolent king, who was brutally murdered by his jealous brother Set. It was Osiris's sister and wife, Isis, who painstakingly gathered his dismembered body parts, all but one which was swallowed by a fish, making for an interesting legend in itself, and, through her powerful magic, temporarily brought him back to life to conceive their son, Horus. This brother-sister pairing was the ultimate symbol of creation, resurrection, and enduring royalty. They were the ideal divine couple, and their union, despite its familial ties, was seen as pure, powerful, and essential for the continuity of life and kingship. For you, the pharaoh, emulating Osiris and Isis by marrying your own sister or even half-sister was a direct act of identifying with these primordial deities. It wasn't just a political alliance, it was a cosmic one. By mirroring the divine pair, you were reinforcing your own divinity and ensuring the stability of the cosmos. It was as if you were saying, "Look, I'm just like Osiris and Isis, so everything's going to be fine. The sun will rise, the Nile will flood, and we'll all be very prosperous." This made the practice less about what we'd call incest today, and more about a sacred imitation of the gods. Historians still argue whether the frequency and exact nature of these unions were always literal conjugal marriages or sometimes more symbolic, but the prevalence of sibling pairings in royal genealogies is undeniable. Let's bring this down to a concrete, if slightly unsettling, historical example. Tutankhamun, the boy king, perhaps the most famous pharaoh of all time thanks to his incredibly intact tomb. You know him from the Golden Mask and the countless documentaries. But did you know that he married his half-sister, Ankh-Senamun? Yes, the young couple, whose tender, albeit somewhat awkward, depictions we see in tomb paintings were indeed siblings, sharing a father, Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, but having different mothers. Their union was a prime example of this royal tradition. They reigned together, and tragically, had at least 2 stillborn daughters, whose tiny mummies were found in Tutankhamun's tomb, bearing genetic markers consistent with offspring of close relatives. It's a sobering reminder that while the religious justification was powerful, the biological consequences could be harsh. The royal harem, a term that might conjure images of exotic delights and endless indulgence, was in reality far more complex and often politically charged. It wasn't just a place for the pharaoh's personal pleasure, though there was certainly an element of that. It was a critical institution for producing heirs and securing alliances. Within these walls, you, the pharaoh, would have many wives and concubines, but the great royal wife, often your sister, held a unique, almost divine status. She was the primary queen, the mother of the next legitimate heir, and her role was as much religious and political as it was marital. It's a bit like having a sprawling corporate headquarters, but the CEO's family members are all key department heads, even if their departments are just divine lineage. While the pharaoh's primary goal in the harem was to produce numerous heirs to secure the dynasty, the social structure within was intricate. Royal women, even those in these unconventional unions, wielded significant power and influence. They weren't merely ornaments, they were often highly educated, involved in temple rituals, and could even act as regents for young pharaohs, as you might recall from our previous chat about Mongol women. This fascinating duality, the seemingly restrictive nature of incestuous marriage, juxtaposed with the considerable authority of royal women, highlights the unique complexities of ancient Egyptian society. You'd be surprised how much political maneuvering went on behind those seemingly serene temple walls. You're deep in the heart of the pharaoh's world, where marriage to a sibling wasn't scandalous but sacred, a living echo of Osiris and Isis. Now, as you contemplate the intricate web of divine lineage and political necessity, let's shift our gaze from the private chambers to the public face of Egyptian society, specifically how they viewed and depicted sexuality in their art. You might imagine a repressed society cloaked in modesty, but the truth is wonderfully, refreshingly different. Ancient Egyptians were remarkably open about human sexuality, and this frankness is evident in their art, a fascinating contrast to many cultures that followed them. Forget the prudish sensibilities that dominated many Western societies for centuries. In ancient Egypt, the human body and its functions, including sexual ones, were seen as natural, even divine aspects of life. You'd stroll through a market, visit a temple, or peer into a tomb, and you wouldn't necessarily encounter blatant pornography, but you'd find an underlying comfort with the physical form and its desires. This wasn't a society that blushed easily when it came to procreation or passion. It's a bit like discovering your grandparents had a secret collection of surprisingly spicy romance novels. A delightful shock. Consider the abundance of phallic symbols you encounter throughout Egyptian art and architecture. These weren't just crude graffiti. They were powerful symbols of fertility, regeneration, and the life-giving force of the sun. Obelisks, those towering stone monuments that pierce the sky, are essentially stylized representations of the erect phallus of Ra, the sun god. They stand as enduring testaments to the Egyptian reverence for creation and vitality. You'd see images of the god Min, often depicted with an erect penis, proudly holding a flail, symbolizing his role as a god of fertility and harvest. He was invoked for good harvests and abundant offspring. Imagine a god whose primary symbol is so direct. It certainly gets the point across without much ambiguity. Historians still argue whether the prominence of these symbols reflects a truly pervasive public display of sexuality or a more esoteric, ritualistic significance understood by the initiated. Beyond religious symbolism, you'd find glimpses of human intimacy in unexpected places. While grand tomb paintings primarily depicted the deceased in idealized, serene poses for the afterlife, some ostraca, pottery shards or limestone flakes used for sketches and notes, or papyri, contained surprisingly explicit, often humorous, erotic drawings. These weren't for public display in temples, but they reveal a playful, sometimes bawdy side to Egyptian life. You might find a sketch of a couple in various amorous positions, or even caricatures of priests engaging in less than pious activities. They're like the ancient equivalent of finding silly doodles in the margins of a serious textbook, a peek behind the formal curtain. This suggests that even while respecting their gods and traditions, Egyptians had a very human capacity for humor and an appreciation for the lighter, more sensual aspects of life. This openness extended to their literature as well, particularly in their love songs and lyrics. These weren't shy, veiled declarations of affection. They were passionate, sometimes overtly sensual poems expressing yearning, desire, and the joys of physical love. You might read lines like, "My love is unique. No one equals her, for she is the most beautiful of all women. When she turns her head, she steals my heart." And then it might transition to a more direct longing for physical union, praising the beloved's body with vivid, often explicit imagery. It's like listening to a modern pop song that starts with a romantic hook and quickly gets to the point. This raw honesty in their poetry gives you a real sense of the emotional and physical intimacy valued in ancient Egyptian relationships, extending beyond the purely procreative aspect. The fact that these texts survived, sometimes even found among personal effects or in the ruins of workmen's villages, tells you that such expressions of desire were not suppressed. They were part of the human experience, celebrated and woven into the tapestry of everyday life. You'd certainly appreciate the honesty, wouldn't you? It's a refreshing change from periods in history where even holding hands in public was considered scandalous. So, from the divine act of creation involving a god's self-pleasure to the open display of fertility symbols and the passionate words of love poetry, ancient Egypt truly stands out. Their approach to sexuality was integrated, holistic, and remarkably unashamed. It was seen as a vital force, intertwined with life, death, and the divine, not something to be hidden or whispered about. You might even feel a little envious of their uninhibited perspective. You've seen how the pharaoh's private life was a reflection of divine creation, and how art in ancient Egypt was surprisingly open about sexuality. But the integration of sexual themes went far beyond just personal life and artistic expression. It permeated the very core of their religious rituals and temple practices. For you, the pharaoh, engaging in these practices wasn't just a matter of belief. It was a performative act, often central to the most sacred ceremonies. Think about the sheer scale of Egyptian religion. It wasn't something confined to a single day of worship. It was a constant, living force that touched every aspect of daily life, from the rising of the sun to the flooding of the Nile. And at the heart of many of these rituals lay the concept of fertility and regeneration, which, as you're now well aware, was often expressed through sexual symbolism. It's like a colossal, ancient stage play where every actor, from the high priest to you, the pharaoh, had a role in ensuring the cosmic order through acts that might seem, to modern eyes, surprisingly carnal. Consider the various cults dedicated to fertility gods. Beyond the omnipresent Min, who you'll remember was often depicted with his prominent erect phallus, there were other deities whose worship involved elements that touched upon the reproductive. For instance, the cult of Hathor, the goddess of love, beauty, music, motherhood, and joy, often involved festivals that were vibrant, lively affairs. These festivals weren't somber religious services. They were joyous celebrations, often involving music, dancing, and significant consumption of alcohol. You can imagine the atmosphere, a sort of ancient, divinely sanctioned party, where inhibitions might have been loosened, and the pursuit of pleasure was seen as a way to honor the goddess. While explicit details of sexual acts within these public festivals are scarce, they weren't exactly publishing their party photos for posterity. The underlying theme was the celebration of life, love, and procreation. Historians still argue whether these celebrations included actual ritualistic sexual acts, or if they were merely symbolic expressions of fertility and joyous abundance. Then there were the specific rituals performed by you, the pharaoh, within the inner sanctums of temples. These weren't public spectacles, but highly sacred, often secretive, ceremonies designed to ensure the prosperity of Egypt. One particular example involves the Sed Festival, or the Festival of Renewal, a jubilee celebrated by the pharaoh after a certain number of years on the throne, initially 30, then usually every 3 years thereafter. This festival was a crucial reaffirmation of your vitality and fitness to rule. Part of this elaborate ritual involved the pharaoh symbolically running a course demonstrating physical prowess, but it also contained elements that reinforced your generative power. It was a cosmic reboot, ensuring that your divine energy, and by extension the land's fertility, remained strong. You might even participate in symbolic acts of union with the various aspects of the land, affirming your role as the ultimate source of life. It's a bit like a king having to prove he can still run a marathon and simultaneously ensure a bountiful harvest. Talk about job requirements. The architectural design of temples themselves sometimes subtly incorporated elements related to creation and fertility. The very layout could reflect the journey from primordial chaos to creation, culminating in the sacred inner sanctuary where divine power resided. The towering pylons at the entrance, like those you'd find at Karnak or Luxor, acted as gateways to a sacred space, often decorated with scenes of you, the pharaoh, triumphing over chaos and maintaining order. This wasn't explicitly sexual in a literal sense, but it reinforced the idea of your power to bring forth life and order from disorder, a concept deeply tied to the Genesis myths. Consider also the use of ritualistic objects within these temple settings. Beyond the phallic amulets that common people might carry for good luck, the temples held statues and artifacts that were imbued with immense power. The act of offering libations, liquid offerings, often water or wine, to gods, or presenting various foodstuffs, was always about maintaining the cycle of life and renewal. In this context, even seemingly mundane offerings could carry an underlying connection to the pharaoh's role in ensuring the land's fertility, a task that, as you remember, was tied to your own virility. It all circled back to that central idea. The pharaoh's body was not just a body, it was a divine conduit, and its generative capacity was crucial for the entire nation. It's a heavy burden, wouldn't you agree? Having your entire kingdom's survival linked to your personal performance at a sacred party is certainly a unique form of pressure. So, from the raucous festivals of Hathor to the solemn Sed festival in the temple, sexual themes and the concept of fertility were not relegated to the shadows. They were celebrated, ritualized, and intertwined with the very essence of ancient Egyptian worship. It's a fascinating testament to a culture that saw no shame in the life-giving forces of the body, embracing them as integral to their spiritual and earthly well-being. You've explored the divine origins of creation, the incestuous royal lineage, and the pervasive presence of sexual themes in art and temple rituals. Now, let's dig a little deeper into the specific ways fertility cults manifested throughout ancient Egypt, and how your role as pharaoh was absolutely central to their purpose. These weren't just abstract beliefs. They were vibrant, active practices that truly shaped daily life, reminding everyone, from the lowliest farmer to the highest priest, of the life-giving forces that sustained their world. Think of the Nile River, the very artery of Egypt, its annual inundation, the predictable flooding that brought fertile silt to the fields, was the bedrock of their civilization. Without it, there was no life, no harvest, no Egypt. This reliance on the Nile fostered a profound reverence for fertility, not just in humans but in the land itself. You, as Pharaoh, were the ultimate guarantor of this fertility, the living link between the divine bounty and the earthly abundance. It's a bit like being the CEO of a huge, incredibly successful farming conglomerate, but your main job is making sure the rain falls and the sun shines through your own divine essence. Talk about job pressure. The most prominent fertility cult, as you might recall from earlier, revolved around the god Min. He was widely worshipped, not just by the royal family but by common people across the land. You'd see his images everywhere, often depicted as an ithyphallic, erect phallus figure, holding a flail, sometimes with a lettuce plant, a known aphrodisiac in ancient times, behind him. Min wasn't just about human procreation. He was also the god of the desert, and crucially, the protector of travelers and a guarantor of good harvests. His festivals, especially those celebrated during the harvest season, were grand affairs designed to ensure continued bounty. You, the pharaoh, would often play a central role in these festivals, sometimes symbolically presenting offerings to Min, or even participating in a ritualistic procession that affirmed your connection to the land's fertility. Historians still argue whether some of the Min festivals involved actual ritualistic sex acts among participants, or if the strong sexual symbolism was purely metaphorical, reinforcing the idea of divine fertility. Then there was the cult of Sobek, the crocodile god. Now you might wonder what a crocodile has to do with fertility, right? Well, crocodiles were powerful, imposing creatures of the Nile, and their very presence was linked to the river's life-giving waters. In some areas, particularly the Fayum oasis where crocodiles were abundant, Sobek was worshipped intensely as a god of fertility and protection. You, as pharaoh, might sponsor temples dedicated to Sobek, or even raise sacred crocodiles, seen as living embodiments of the god. The power of the crocodile, often associated with strength and virility, resonated with the pharaoh's own image of potency. It's a reminder that beauty standards for gods in ancient Egypt were quite varied. Beyond specific deities, the general reverence for fecundity permeated funerary beliefs too. The journey to the afterlife wasn't just about spiritual purity, it was also about eternal regeneration. You, the deceased, hoped to be reborn, to continue your existence in the field of reeds, their version of paradise. This concept of rebirth often drew parallels to sexual reproduction and the renewal of life. Even the act of mummification, as we discussed briefly, could incorporate symbols designed to ensure the deceased's potency in the afterlife. It wasn't just about preserving the body, it was about ensuring its capacity for eternal life and, symbolically, for continued creation. You wouldn't want to show up in the afterlife feeling unproductive, would you? Everyday objects also played a part. Amulets depicting sexual organs, or goddesses like Taret, the hippopotamus goddess of childbirth and fertility, were common. You'd see them worn by women hoping for successful pregnancies, or placed in homes to bless the inhabitants with children. These weren't necessarily part of elaborate cult rituals, but they were tangible expressions of the deep societal desire for fertility and abundance. So, from the grand public festivals honoring Min to the more localized worship of Sobek, and even down to the amulets worn by commoners, the concept of fertility was absolutely paramount. Your role as pharaoh was to embody and channel this divine life force, ensuring that the Nile would flood, the crops would grow, and your people would continue to multiply. It was a constant active engagement with the very forces of life and death, all centered around the generative power that you, as the living god, were believed to possess. It certainly puts a lot of pressure on your daily routine, doesn't it? Just imagine having to be on for the entire country every single day to ensure the next harvest. You've absorbed the intense focus on fertility cults and your pivotal role as pharaoh in ensuring Egypt's abundance. Now, let's transition from the broad sweep of religious practice to a specific, striking aspect of ancient Egyptian belief, the symbolic phalluses. You'll discover these weren't just random, cheeky carvings. They were profound symbols with deep religious, regenerative, and even protective meanings, appearing in contexts you might least expect. Imagine walking through a bustling ancient Egyptian marketplace, perhaps in Thebes, or navigating the labyrinthine corridors of a temple complex. You wouldn't necessarily see overt displays everywhere, but once you understand the symbolism, you'd start to notice them. The most iconic representation, as we briefly touched upon, is the obelisk. These colossal stone pillars, tapering to a pyramidion at the top, piercing the sky, are often interpreted as stylized representations of the phallus of the sun god Ra. Erected at the entrances of temples, they were not just architectural marvels, but potent symbols of creation, life-giving power, and the connection between heaven and earth. For you, the pharaoh, sponsoring the erection of an obelisk, was an act of profound religious significance, a testament to your own divine virility and your role in maintaining cosmic order. It's like building a giant, skyscraping monument that also subtly tells everyone, yes, I am incredibly powerful and life-giving. Subtle indeed. Beyond, the monumental phallic imagery appeared in smaller, more intimate forms. Amulets, tiny charms worn by individuals or placed in homes, often depicted male genitalia or deities known for their fertility, such as Min. These weren't merely decorative. They were believed to bestow blessings, protect against evil, ensure fertility for women hoping to conceive, or even enhance a man's potency. You might wear one discreetly under your tunic, or see a woman tying one to her belt. They were practical magic, a tangible link to the divine forces of life. It's a quirky tidbit to imagine people walking around with little good luck charms that overtly signified reproductive power, isn't it? Very different from today's four-leaf clovers. The presence of the phallus was also crucial in the mythical narrative of Osiris, a story that profoundly influenced Egyptian funerary practices. As you recall, Osiris was dismembered by his jealous brother Set, and his body parts were scattered across Egypt. His devoted wife, Isis, tirelessly searched for and reassembled him, but one crucial piece was missing, his phallus, which had been swallowed by a fish in the Nile. Despite this loss, Isis, through her immense magical power, was able to fashion a substitute phallus and briefly resurrect Osiris to conceive their son, Horus. This act, depicted in various forms, emphasized that even in death, the generative power of the divine could be restored. It underscored the concept of regeneration and rebirth in the afterlife. This leads us to the surprising, and perhaps most unbelievable, aspect of these symbols, their appearance in funerary contexts and mummification. You might expect that after death, all focus would shift to the spiritual, disembodied soul. But for the Egyptians, the body, or at least its capacity for rebirth and continued existence, remained vitally important. In some instances, during the mummification process, efforts were made to ensure the deceased retained or symbolically possessed their generative power. This could involve careful preservation, or even the inclusion of symbolic phalluses within the mummy's wrappings or tomb. The idea was to ensure the deceased's ability to participate in the ongoing cycle of life and renewal in the afterlife, echoing Osiris's resurrection. Historians still argue whether such symbolic inclusions were widespread or limited to specific periods or royal figures, but their presence speaks volumes about the Egyptian preoccupation with eternal life through regenerative power. So, for you, the pharaoh, whose very existence was a bridge between the mortal and the divine, the symbolic phallus was a constant reminder of your sacred duty to ensure the continuity of life, from the annual flooding of the Nile to the endless cycle of rebirth in the afterlife. These symbols weren't just crude representations, they were complex, multi-layered expressions of a worldview where creation, fertility, and eternal life were inextricably linked, all emanating from the powerful, often unblushing, force of generative power. It's truly a testament to a culture that saw life, in all its forms, as something to be celebrated, from the grandest temple to the most intimate amulet. You've seen the pervasive power of symbolic phalluses, from towering obelisks to tiny amulets, all speaking to the ancient Egyptians' profound reverence for fertility and regeneration. Now, let's consider how this unwavering belief in continued life and creative power extended even beyond the tomb, into the very concept of the afterlife. You are about to discover that for the ancient Egyptians, the journey into eternity wasn't just about spiritual transcendence, it often included the surprising expectation of eternal orgasm. Imagine you've passed from this world. Your body has been meticulously mummified, your vital organs carefully preserved, and your tomb stocked with everything you'd need for the perilous journey through the underworld and into the field of reeds, their blissful paradise. But what exactly did blissful paradise entail for an Egyptian noble, or, more importantly, for you, the pharaoh? It wasn't merely a place of endless banquets and peaceful repose. For many, it also encompassed the continuation of earthly pleasures, including the most fundamental act of creation, sexual union. This idea ties back directly to the myths you've already explored. Remember Atum, the self-generated god who created the world through an act of divine masturbation, and Osiris, dismembered but then resurrected by Isis, regaining his generative power to conceive Horus. These narratives established a powerful precedent. Creation and rebirth were intrinsically linked to sexual potency. For you, the deceased, to truly experience eternal life, to be fully reborn in the afterlife, meant to retain or even enhance your capacity for procreation and sexual pleasure. It's a bit like buying a new deluxe model car for the afterlife and finding out it comes with an unlimited fuel card and a perpetually sunny climate. Texts found in tombs, particularly those from the Middle and New Kingdoms, hint at a continuation of earthly relationships and desires in the afterlife. While not always explicitly detailing eternal orgasm in those exact words, they speak of the deceased joining with their spouse, being fruitful, and living for millions of years in a state of eternal contentment, often implying a continuation of the physical joys of life. For you, the pharaoh, this was amplified. Your divine status meant your generative power was critical not just for Egypt on earth, but for the very cosmic order in the afterlife. You wouldn't want to show up in the field of reeds and find yourself unable to continue the grand cycle of existence, would you? That would be quite the cosmic embarrassment. There's a fascinating, albeit sometimes unsettling aspect to this belief. The emphasis on the male's generative power, even beyond death. Just as Osiris needed to be remembered to conceive Horus, the deceased male hoped to maintain his potency. This could be symbolized through amulets placed within the mummy's wrappings, or through the careful preservation of the male anatomy during mummification, as we touched upon earlier. The goal was to ensure that your essence, your vitality, remained intact for your eternal journey. Historians still argue whether the concept of eternal orgasm was a literal expectation of continuous physical pleasure, or a symbolic representation of endless regeneration and vitality. But the emphasis on maintaining generative power is a mainstream historical fact. Consider the spells and incantations found in the Book of the Dead, a collection of funerary texts designed to guide the deceased through the underworld. While many spells focused on protection from demons and navigating judgment, some subtly touch upon themes of vitality and renewal that implicitly include reproductive power. You'd recite these spells, confident that they would secure your place among the gods, where life continued in its fullest, most vibrant form. It's a quirky tidbit that even your eternal survival was, in some ways, linked to your continued productivity. This notion of eternal sexual potency stands in stark contrast to many later religious traditions that often emphasize asceticism or a purely spiritual, non-physical afterlife. For the ancient Egyptians, the body and its pleasures were not inherently sinful or to be shed. They were a gift from the gods, to be enjoyed and continued into eternity. You would desire to wake up in the afterlife feeling vibrant, whole, and capable of experiencing joy in all its forms, including the physical. It's a remarkably optimistic and perhaps a little surprising view of what comes after. So, as you drift off, contemplating the pharaoh's journey beyond this life, remember that for them, eternity wasn't just a long nap. It was a continuation of existence in all its glorious, vibrant, and sometimes unbelievably carnal forms. You've explored the pharaoh's incredible expectation of eternal potency, a concept so integrated into their worldview that it shaped funerary practices. Now, as you consider these divine, often incestuous, and always significant royal unions, let's step away from the dazzling gold and the sacred chambers for a moment and look at the lives of ordinary Egyptians. You'll find that while royal practices were unique, the principles governing marriage for commoners reveal a society that was surprisingly practical, often egalitarian, and certainly more conventional than the pharaoh's inner circle. Imagine you're a farmer living along the fertile banks of the Nile, or a skilled craftsman in a bustling city like Memphis. Your life, unlike that of the pharaoh, wasn't steeped in divine reenactments or cosmic responsibility for the inundation. For you, marriage was primarily a social and economic arrangement, focused on establishing a household, raising children, and ensuring the stability of your family unit. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian weddings were primarily social arrangements rather than religious ceremonies, with a focus on establishing a household and ensuring its stability. There weren't elaborate temple ceremonies with priests officiating. No I do's as we know them. The union was formalized when the bride moved her belongings into the groom's home, and they began living together as husband and wife. It's a bit like a modern-day common law marriage, but without the legal complexities, very straightforward. Arranged marriages were common, especially among more affluent families, where property and inheritance played a role. Parents might decide on a match to consolidate resources or secure advantageous connections. However, evidence suggests that love and affection were also valued in these unions. You can find numerous love poems and letters exchanged between spouses that speak of deep affection and emotional connection, not just practical arrangements. It wasn't uncommon for couples to describe each other with endearing terms and express genuine longing when separated. So, while your marriage might have been arranged, it certainly wasn't devoid of emotion. You might even argue that the arranged nature freed them from the pressures of finding the one and allowed love to blossom after the commitment. A quirky tidbit, perhaps, to think that romance could bloom so genuinely from what seems like a purely pragmatic starting point. What's truly remarkable about commoner marriages in ancient Egypt is the relatively strong position of women within these unions. Unlike many other ancient societies, Egyptian women enjoyed considerable legal rights. They could own property, inherit land, enter into contracts, represent themselves in court, and even initiate divorce. This meant that while marriage was important, a woman wasn't entirely subsumed into her husband's legal identity. She retained her own agency. You, as an Egyptian woman, could run your own business, manage your own finances, and make decisions about your children's upbringing. This makes their society stand out, particularly when compared to contemporaries like the Greeks or Romans, where women's legal standing was often significantly more restricted. Historians still argue whether the perceived egalitarianism of Egyptian women's rights translated consistently into everyday social practice across all classes, but their legal framework was undeniably progressive for its time. Polygamy, while practiced by the pharaoh and the elite, especially those who could afford to support multiple households, was far less common among ordinary people. Most commoner marriages were monogamous, simply due to economic necessity. Supporting one family was often challenging enough, let alone multiple wives and their children. So, while your pharaoh was busy maintaining divine bloodlines with multiple sisters and half-sisters, you, the average Egyptian, were likely focusing on building a strong, stable family unit with one spouse, relying on mutual support and affection to navigate life's challenges. The purpose of marriage for commoners was overwhelmingly focused on having children, particularly sons, to ensure the continuity of the family line and to provide support in old age. A large family was a blessing, a sign of prosperity, and a guarantee of care in one's later years. You would have wanted many healthy children to work the fields or carry on your craft, creating a sense of generational security. So, while the pharaoh was securing the cosmos with his offspring, you were simply securing your retirement plan. You've gained insight into the surprisingly pragmatic and often egalitarian nature of marriage among ordinary Egyptians, a stark contrast to the pharaoh's divinely sanctioned incest. Now, let's delve deeper into one of the most progressive aspects of ancient Egyptian society, the remarkable legal rights of women, particularly concerning marriage and, perhaps even more surprisingly, divorce and agency. You'll find that Egyptian women possessed a degree of independence and control over their personal lives that was exceptionally rare in the ancient world. Imagine you are an ancient Egyptian woman. Unlike your counterparts in many contemporary societies, you weren't merely considered the property of your father or husband. You had a distinct legal identity. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian women could own and inherit property, manage their own assets, conduct business, and even initiate legal proceedings in court on their own behalf, all without requiring a male guardian to represent them. Think of it. If you wanted to sell a piece of land, start a small weaving business, or even sue your neighbor for that noisy donkey, you could do it all by yourself. It's a level of autonomy that would make many women in later historical periods, even up to the 19th century in some parts of the world, quite envious. This impressive legal standing naturally extended to marriage and its dissolution. While marriages were social contracts, not religious vows, they were taken seriously, but they were also revocable. The concept of divorce was well established and accessible to both men and women. If a marriage wasn't working, either spouse could initiate a separation. You, as a woman, didn't need to prove adultery or abuse to seek a divorce. Simply stating your desire to end the union was often sufficient. This level of agency is a truly striking aspect of ancient Egyptian law. Historians still argue whether the frequency of divorce was high, or if social pressures discouraged it, but the legal framework for it was undeniably in place. Furthermore, economic provisions were often made for the wife in case of divorce. Marriage contracts, though not always written down for commoners, they were understood social agreements, often stipulated what would happen to property and assets. It was common for a husband to pay his wife a sum of money or provide her with property upon divorce, especially if she was leaving with children. This acted as a form of protection, ensuring that women weren't left destitute after a marriage ended. It's a bit like an ancient prenuptial agreement, but with a built-in safety net. A quirky tidbit is that in some cases, if the husband initiated the divorce without sufficient cause, he might be obligated to return the dowry that the wife brought into the marriage, in addition to providing ongoing support. This doesn't mean ancient Egyptian society was a perfect utopia of gender equality. Patriarchal norms certainly existed, and men generally held positions of greater power in public life. However, within the domestic sphere and regarding legal rights, women's positions were remarkably strong. You could run a household, manage servants, engage in trade, and raise your children with significant authority. Your voice carried weight within the family unit and was recognized by the law. Contrast this with the situation in contemporary Greece, where women, particularly in Athens, were largely confined to the home, had no legal standing, and could not own property independently. Or consider early Roman society, where women remained under the legal guardianship of their fathers or husbands for much of their lives. The Egyptian system, by comparison, offered a degree of freedom and respect for women that was centuries ahead of its time. It's almost as if they said, hey, if the goddess Isis can put her husband back together and conceive a child on her own, then surely a mortal woman can manage her own finances. So, while the pharaoh was entangled in the divine complexities of incestuous unions for cosmic stability, the average Egyptian woman navigated her life with a surprising amount of legal and personal autonomy. The option of divorce, coupled with her property rights, provided a crucial form of agency, allowing her to shape her own destiny in ways that were truly exceptional in the ancient world. It makes you wonder what kind of advice a savvy Egyptian lawyer would offer today, doesn't it? Probably something about having all your ducks, or sacred geese, in a row. You've been through the surprising legal rights of Egyptian women, including their ability to divorce, which was quite revolutionary for its time. Now, as we delve deeper into the private lives of ordinary Egyptians, those living outside the pharaoh's divinely complicated family, let's turn our attention to a truly fascinating and practical aspect of their intimate lives: their efforts at contraception. You might think birth control is a modern invention, but the ancient Egyptians, with their ingenuity and deep knowledge of natural remedies, devised some remarkably creative, if sometimes bizarre, methods. Imagine you're an ancient Egyptian couple, perhaps a potter and his wife, living in a small village. You've already had a few children, and while children are a blessing, you understand the demands of a large family on your limited resources. Or perhaps, for health reasons, another pregnancy is ill-advised. What do? Well, you wouldn't head to the nearest pharmacy, of course. Instead, you turn to the wisdom of traditional medicine, passed down through generations, often recorded in papyrus scrolls. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptians had a considerable body of medical knowledge, including methods aimed at controlling fertility. One of the most widely cited and perhaps the most intriguing methods involved crocodile dung. Yes, you heard that right. Crocodile dung. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest and most comprehensive medical texts from ancient Egypt, dating back to around 1550 BC, describes a pessary, a device inserted into the vagina, made from a mixture that included crocodile dung, natron, a natural salt, and honey. This concoction was then inserted into the vagina as a barrier or spermicide. The theory was that the alkaline nature of the dung, combined with the stickiness of the honey, would act as a physical barrier and potentially alter the vaginal environment to be inhospitable to sperm. You might be thinking, well, that sounds aromatic, and you'd probably be right. It's a quirky tidbit that certainly stands out in the annals of ancient medicine, showcasing their willingness to experiment with available resources, however unconventional. Historians still argue whether these methods were truly effective or merely based on anecdotal evidence and magical thinking. Beyond crocodile dung, other plant-based remedies were employed. For instance, acacia gum, which turns into a lactic acid-like substance when fermented, was also used as a vaginal pessary. Lactic acid is known to be spermicidal, so this method might have had some genuine effectiveness. Women might also have used honey on its own, not just for its stickiness as a barrier, but possibly for its antibacterial properties. Another ingredient mentioned in some texts is a mixture of fruit, honey, and a paste made from the fibers of the acacia tree. These would be rolled into a ball and inserted before intercourse. It's clear they understood the principle of creating a physical or chemical barrier. Less intrusive, but perhaps equally imaginative, methods included drinking certain concoctions. Some texts suggest ingesting a mixture of celery seeds and wine as a contraceptive. Others mention a potion made from the bark of willow trees. While the efficacy of these oral contraceptives is highly debatable by modern standards, it shows a multifaceted approach to family planning, trying both local applications and systemic remedies. You can almost hear the ancient Egyptian woman sighing, "Oh, not the celery seeds again." For post-coital methods, the Egyptians also had ideas. One rather crude method involved douching immediately after intercourse, often with a mixture of water and natron. The idea was to wash away the sperm before conception could occur. Again, the effectiveness would have been limited, but it speaks to a deliberate attempt to control family size. What's truly striking is that these methods, while perhaps rudimentary by today's standards, demonstrate a clear societal awareness and desire for family planning. It wasn't just about having as many children as possible. There was a recognition that controlling fertility was important for the well-being of the family unit. You had options, albeit unconventional ones, to manage your reproductive life. It contrasts sharply with some later historical periods where discussions of birth control were outright forbidden. So, while your pharaoh was busy ensuring cosmic regeneration, the common Egyptian was experimenting with some truly inventive, and at times quite pungent, methods to manage their families. It's a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring desire for control over one's own body and future, even in the depths of antiquity. You've just navigated the surprisingly inventive and somewhat aromatic world of ancient Egyptian contraception, a testament to their practical approach to family life. Now, let's consider another intimate, yet often overlooked aspect of daily life that speaks volumes about their culture: personal hygiene habits, particularly concerning intimate matters. You might expect a civilization of thousands of years ago to be rather unkempt, but the Egyptians, from the lowliest servant to you, the majestic pharaoh, were remarkably fastidious about cleanliness. Imagine the climate of Egypt: hot, dusty, and arid. In such an environment, maintaining personal cleanliness wasn't just about comfort. It was crucial for health, and perhaps more importantly, for religious purity. You'll find that for the ancient Egyptians, cleanliness was truly next to godliness. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptians placed a very high value on personal hygiene, integrating it deeply into their daily routines and religious practices. They bathed regularly, often multiple times a day, using natron, a natural salt mixture, as a cleansing agent, and rubbing their skin with oils to keep it supple in the dry heat. It's a bit like having a spa day built into your daily schedule, but without the cucumber slices over your eyes. For intimate hygiene, particularly for women, the practices were quite thorough, especially given the lack of modern conveniences. After urination or defecation, water was undoubtedly used for cleansing. Given the concern for purity and the prevention of unpleasant odors, it's highly probable that they utilized various cloths, sponges, or even fingers and water for post-toilet cleansing. The widespread availability of water from the Nile, even if it had to be fetched, meant that bathing and washing were regular activities for most people, not just the elite. The use of perfumes and scented oils was also common, not just for allure but also for covering any lingering body odors in a world without modern deodorants. Both men and women used fragrant oils made from flowers like lily, myrrh, or frankincense. You would certainly apply these to your skin, especially after bathing, to feel fresh and to present yourself appropriately. This shows a holistic approach to personal care, where cleanliness went hand in hand with pleasant scents. It's a quirky tidbit that their deodorant was often a luxurious plant-based perfume. Beyond daily washing, there were more specific practices related to reproductive health. For instance, after menstruation or after childbirth, women would likely engage in more thorough cleansing rituals to ensure perceived purity. While specific details on female intimate cleansing beyond general washing are less documented for everyday practice, the emphasis on purity in temple rituals suggests a strong cultural value placed on cleanliness in all aspects of life. For priests, strict rules about ritual purity before entering temples were enforced, often involving full-body washing and even shaving all body hair. This pervasive attitude towards hygiene undoubtedly extended to private matters. Historians still argue whether some of the specific ingredients mentioned in medical papyri for vaginal pessaries, like honey or certain plant extracts, also served a dual purpose of cleansing and contraception, blurring the lines between medicinal and hygienic uses. Think about the conditions in which they lived: crowded cities, reliance on the Nile, and no sophisticated sewage systems as we know them. In such an environment, good hygiene was not just a preference, it was a matter of public health. Diseases could spread rapidly, and a clean body was seen as a barrier against illness. You, the pharaoh, would have your attendants and servants ensuring your bath was always prepared, your oils were always fragrant, and your clothing was always fresh. Your personal cleanliness was a symbol of your divine order, a reflection of the harmony you brought to the land. So, while we often focus on the grand monuments and the powerful gods, Remember that the ancient Egyptians were also incredibly practical and detail-oriented about their daily lives, right down to the most intimate aspects of personal care. Their commitment to hygiene was a testament to their sophistication, their understanding of health, and their deep-seated belief that cleanliness brought them closer to the divine. You'd certainly appreciate a fresh bath after a long day ruling Egypt, wouldn't you? You've just scrubbed clean your understanding of ancient Egyptian personal hygiene, realizing their dedication to cleanliness. Now, let's pivot from daily routines to the more formal study of the body, delving into their surprisingly advanced medical perspectives on reproductive health and ailments. You'll find that Egyptian physicians weren't just about setting broken bones or treating snake bites. They possessed a sophisticated, albeit often empirical, understanding of the human reproductive system and its various challenges. Imagine you are an ancient Egyptian woman experiencing difficulties conceiving, or perhaps dealing with a persistent gynecological issue. Where would you turn? Not to a modern clinic, of course, but to a physician, often highly trained and respected within society. These doctors weren't merely relying on magic, although that certainly played a role in some treatments. They had practical, observable knowledge of anatomy and physiology, passed down through generations and meticulously recorded on papyri. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian medical texts, such as the Kahun gynecological papyrus dating to around 1800 BC, are among the oldest surviving medical documents in the world and demonstrate a systematic approach to women's health, including reproductive issues. These papyri reveal a fascinating array of conditions they recognized and attempted to treat. You'd find descriptions of uterine prolapse, abnormal vaginal discharge, menstrual irregularities, and even issues related to fertility and contraception. For example, the Kahun papyrus details various diagnostic procedures, including examining the patient's urine and even observing her eyes to determine the nature of her ailment. It's a bit like an ancient, more mystical version of the eyes are the window to the soul and also, apparently, to your uterus. A quirky tidbit is that some diagnoses involved placing onions near the woman's mouth or nose overnight. If her breath smelled of onions in the morning, it was considered a sign of fertility, as the odor was believed to travel through the body. When it came to treatments for infertility, the Egyptians had a variety of approaches. Some involved mixtures to be ingested, others were pessaries or fumigations. For example, a woman unable to conceive might be advised to lie on a mixture of oil and honey, or to fumigate herself with incense and goose fat. While many of these remedies relied on sympathetic magic or ingredients with no true pharmacological basis, some might have offered minor relief or placebo effects. What's clear is their dedication to finding solutions for a deeply distressing problem, given the societal importance of children. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of these treatments was more psychological or physiological, but their existence demonstrates a sustained effort to understand and intervene in reproductive health. Men's reproductive health was also addressed, though perhaps with less detail in the surviving texts. Issues of male impotence or low fertility were likely treated with various potions and incantations, often with a focus on increasing virility. Given the pharaoh's emphasis on his own potency as a divine ruler, it's safe to assume that any potential male reproductive issues within the royal family would have been treated with the utmost urgency and secrecy, involving the most skilled physicians and powerful magical remedies available. Beyond fertility, these medical texts also touched upon pregnancy and childbirth. They contained spells and remedies to ease labor, ensure a healthy delivery, and protect both mother and child. Childbirth was often assisted by midwives, and mothers might sit on birthing bricks decorated with images of protective deities like Bees or Taweret, who you might remember as the hippopotamus goddess of childbirth. This blend of practical midwifery, herbal remedies, and magical protection highlights their holistic approach to health. So, from the intricate workings of the female reproductive system to the mysteries of conception, ancient Egyptian physicians applied their knowledge to understand and address human sexuality and fertility. Their medical papyri stand as a testament to their sophisticated curiosity and their practical attempts to navigate the complexities of the human body, even without microscopes or modern biochemistry. You might even find yourself impressed by their ingenuity, even if you wouldn't volunteer for the onion test yourself. You've just peered into the ancient Egyptian clinic, glimpsing their early, empirical understanding of reproductive medicine. Now, let's explore how they often blended this practical knowledge with the realm of the magical and divine, specifically through the use of amulets and charms. You'll discover that these weren't just pretty trinkets, they were powerful tools believed to enhance fertility, protect against evil, and safeguard the delicate processes of conception, pregnancy, and birth. Imagine you are an ancient Egyptian woman yearning for a child, or perhaps a pregnant woman anxious about a safe delivery. While you might consult a physician, you would just as likely turn to a priest or a local wise woman for a charm, believing firmly in the power of sympathetic magic and divine intervention. This is a mainstream historical fact. Amulets and magical charms played an integral role in ancient Egyptian daily life, particularly concerning health, protection, and fertility. They were worn on the body, placed in homes, or even incorporated into mummy wrappings to ensure well-being in the afterlife. It's a bit like having a lucky rabbit's foot, but far more intricate and with much higher stakes. Many amulets specifically targeted fertility and successful childbirth. One of the most common and recognizable was the depiction of Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess. You might remember her from our previous discussions. She was typically shown as an upright, pregnant hippopotamus with pendulous breasts, the paws of a lion, and the tail of a crocodile, a rather formidable yet protective figure. Despite her fierce appearance, Taweret was seen as a benevolent goddess, protecting women during pregnancy and childbirth, and watching over infants. You'd see her image on small faience or stone amulets worn by expectant mothers, or on magic wands used by midwives during labor. Her presence was believed to ward off evil spirits that might harm the mother or child during the vulnerable period of birth. A quirky tidbit is how such a powerful and seemingly intimidating creature became the embodiment of gentle maternal protection. Another popular figure for fertility amulets was Bes. Unlike the majestic deities, Bes was a dwarf god with a grotesque, often comical face, a large head, and an excitable demeanor. He was a protector of the household, especially women and children, and was associated with music, dancing, and joy, all elements that contribute to a happy, fertile home. You'd find amulets of Bes, often grinning or sticking out his tongue, worn to promote fertility and ensure safe deliveries. His presence was thought to frighten away malevolent spirits and bring good fortune. It's almost as if they believed a bit of divine silliness could scare away the bad guys. Beyond specific deities, certain symbols themselves acted as powerful charms. The Ankh, the looped cross symbolizing life, was a universal symbol of vitality and eternal existence, often used to promote general well-being, including fertility. The Tayet knot, often called the Isis knot, was a symbol associated with the goddess Isis and offered protection, particularly to women. Its shape resembles a looped sash and was believed to harness Isis's protective and regenerative powers. You'd see these woven into linen bandages for mummies, but also used as personal amulets for the living. For men, while less commonly depicted on specific amulets for sexual performance, the general themes of vitality and regeneration were paramount. Amulets related to the god Min, or abstract phallic symbols, as you recall, were also used. The overall desire for male potency was strong, especially for you, the pharaoh, whose virility reflected the health of the entire land. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of these amulets was purely psychological, placebo effect, or if the strong belief system genuinely contributed to positive outcomes for the wearer, a fascinating intersection of faith and physical well-being. These amulets and charms weren't just superstitions, they were an integral part of the ancient Egyptian healthcare system and their worldview. They provided a sense of control and hope in the face of unpredictable natural processes like conception and childbirth, which carried significant risks in antiquity. You would hold these charms, touch them, and believe in their power, drawing comfort and confidence from their divine connection. So, whether a woman was seeking to conceive, enduring the pangs of labor, or simply wishing for a healthy family, these small, powerful objects served as a constant reminder that the gods were watching, ready to offer their protective and life-giving blessings. They truly highlight how interwoven the practical and the magical were in the tapestry of ancient Egyptian life. You've just explored the magical realm of amulets and charms, seeing how the ancient Egyptians sought divine aid for fertility and protection. Now, let's turn our attention to a more sobering aspect of those unique royal marriages we discussed earlier, the practice of incest within the pharaonic lineage. While religiously justified and divinely inspired, these close family unions almost certainly led to significant genetic consequences and potential health issues for the royal children. You are about to confront the biological reality behind the sacred ideal. Imagine you are a royal physician, tasked with the health of the pharaoh's children, born of unions between siblings or even half-siblings. While the divine blessing might be strong, the laws of genetics are, as we now know, even stronger. This is a mainstream historical fact. Genetic studies on royal mummies, particularly from the New Kingdom, have provided compelling evidence of birth defects and health problems consistent with generations of inbreeding. The human body, for all its wonder, does not fare well with too much genetic similarity. It's like trying to bake a cake using only sugar and more sugar. It might sound sweet, but the end result is often quite fragile. The most famous, and perhaps tragic example, is Tutankhamun, the boy pharaoh you'll remember who married his half-sister, Ankhesenamun. Through DNA analysis conducted on his mummy and those of his immediate family members, geneticists have pieced together a compelling, if heartbreaking, picture. Tutankhamun himself suffered from a range of ailments. He had a clubfoot, likely requiring a cane, many of which were found in his tomb, a cleft palate, and scoliosis. He also showed evidence of Kohler's disease, a rare bone disorder. These are classic signs often associated with high levels of consanguinity or inbreeding. He wasn't exactly leaping over hurdles in the Olympic Games of his time, was he? Further, the DNA analysis indicated that Tutankhamun's parents were indeed full siblings. Akhenaten and his unnamed sister, referred to by researchers as the younger lady mummy. This means Tutankhamun himself was the product of a brother-sister union. His two stillborn daughters, found mummified in his tomb, also showed genetic markers consistent with severe congenital defects, likely contributing to their non-viability. Their fragile bones whisper a silent truth about the biological cost of maintaining a pure divine bloodline. It's a stark reminder that even divine justifications can't override fundamental biological principles. The underlying genetic principle is recessive genes. We all carry genes for certain traits, some of which are beneficial, others potentially harmful. If a harmful gene is recessive, it only manifests if you inherit 2 copies of it, one from each parent. When closely related individuals reproduce, the chance of both parents carrying the same harmful recessive gene, and thus passing 2 copies to their offspring, dramatically increases. This leads to a higher incidence of genetic disorders, birth defects, and reduced viability. It's a quirky tidbit to think that the very act intended to purify the bloodline might have inadvertently weakened it over generations. While the evidence is strong for Tutankhamun's lineage, pinpointing specific genetic disorders from mummified remains can be challenging. Many health issues might not leave obvious skeletal traces, and the diagnostic tools for ancient diseases are still evolving. Historians still argue whether the high incidence of certain ailments in royal mummies was solely due to inbreeding, or if other factors, such as poor diet, endemic diseases, or occupational hazards, also played significant roles. However, the genetic evidence from Tutankhamun's family provides a compelling mainstream historical fact about the inherent risks of royal incest. So, while the pharaohs believed their unions with siblings and close relatives were a sacred act, ensuring divine purity and cosmic order, nature often exacted a silent biological toll. The weakened bones and unfulfilled lives of some of the royal children stand as a poignant testament to the tension between ancient religious beliefs and the immutable laws of genetics. It's a bittersweet truth that even god-kings were not entirely immune to the consequences of their most sacred practices. You've just peered into the sobering genetic consequences of the pharaohs' incestuous unions, realizing that even divine status couldn't entirely override biological realities. Now, let's pivot from the hard science of DNA to the softer, yet equally complex realm of historical interpretation. We'll confront the fact that despite the concrete evidence, historians still argue whether the high incidence of certain ailments in royal mummies was solely due to inbreeding or if other factors, such as poor diet, endemic diseases, or occupational hazards, also played significant roles. This is an open scholarly debate, revealing the nuanced challenges of piecing together ancient lives. Imagine you're a modern Egyptologist, examining a mummy with signs of physical deformities or chronic illness. Your first thought might be, inbreeding, especially given what we now understand about the royal family's marital practices. However, the picture is rarely that simple. The ancient world was a crucible of health challenges that extended far beyond genetic predispositions. You had no antibiotics, limited understanding of sanitation, and diets that, while seemingly rich in some ways, often lacked crucial nutrients or were contaminated. It's a bit like trying to solve a complex puzzle where half the pieces are missing, and the ones you have are covered in ancient dust. Consider the role of endemic diseases. Ancient Egypt was rife with pathogens. The Nile, while life-giving, was also a breeding ground for parasites. Schistosomiasis, also known as bilharzia, a parasitic disease transmitted by snails in fresh water, was incredibly common, causing chronic illness and organ damage. Malaria was also prevalent, particularly in the marshy areas. These diseases could weaken the immune system, lead to secondary infections, and contribute to a general state of ill health that might be mistaken for, or exacerbated by, genetic issues. You might have inherited a tendency towards a weak immune system due to inbreeding, but then a severe bout of malaria could be the direct cause of your demise. Historians still argue whether the long-term impact of widespread parasitic infections contributed more to the overall poor health observed in the ancient Egyptian population, including royalty, than genetic factors alone. Then there's the diet. While the pharaohs certainly didn't starve, their diet, even for royalty, might not have been as balanced as you'd imagine. Staples like bread and beer, yes, they drank a lot of beer, even the kids, were nutritious, but lacked certain vitamins. There's evidence of dental issues, likely caused by grit from stone-ground bread, which could lead to infections. Nutritional deficiencies, such as scurvy, lack of vitamin C, or rickets, lack of vitamin D, could also contribute to bone deformities and overall fragility, mimicking some of the symptoms often attributed solely to inbreeding. A quirky tidbit. Some analyses of royal mummies suggest they may have consumed too much sugar, leading to issues like diabetes, which would further complicate their health profiles. Finally, think about occupational hazards and the general stresses of royal life. While you, the pharaoh, might not have been toiling in the fields, your life was far from stress-free. Constant political maneuvering, the pressure of divine responsibility, and the physical demands of ceremonial duties could take a toll. Injuries, even minor ones that could easily become infected in an era without antiseptics, were also a risk. For example, Tutankhamun's leg fracture, which might have led to a fatal infection, could have been an accidental injury, not necessarily linked to a genetic weakness. The core of the debate among scholars is not to dismiss the impact of inbreeding, which the genetic evidence clearly supports, but to ensure a comprehensive understanding of all contributing factors to royal health. It's about building a holistic picture, acknowledging that ancient lives were complex and often subject to multiple interacting stressors. You can't just point to one cause when so many variables were at play. So, While the image of a pharaoh suffering from genetic ailments due to incestuous unions is compelling, remember that the full historical truth is often more intricate. It's a testament to the ongoing work of archaeologists, geneticists, and historians, continually refining our understanding of a world so distant yet so fascinating. You've wrestled with the complexities of historical health diagnoses, understanding that the pharaoh's ailments weren't solely due to their unique marital practices. Now, let's hone in on a crucial distinction when discussing royal unions: the difference between ritual versus reality. You'll see that while the incestuous marriages often had profound symbolic meaning, their lived experience and how they were perceived by the public could be quite varied. Imagine standing in a grand temple, witnessing you, the pharaoh, engaging in a sacred ceremony alongside your royal sister wife. To the assembled priests and nobility, this wasn't merely a private family affair, it was a cosmic event. The union was a tangible reenactment of the divine pairing of Osiris and Isis, ensuring the continuation of cosmic order and the fertility of Egypt itself. This is a mainstream historical fact. The perceived divinity of the pharaoh meant that their marriages, especially with close relatives, were imbued with deep religious significance, serving as powerful rituals to maintain the sacred bloodline and emulate the gods. It was a theatrical performance on the grandest scale, with the fate of the nation hanging in the balance. You couldn't just whisper sweet nothings. You were essentially performing a sacred ballet for the gods. However, the reality of these relationships, on a day-to-day human level, might have been far more nuanced. While the religious justification for sibling marriage was strong, the personal dynamics would have varied wildly from couple to couple. Did every pharaoh feel a profound spiritual connection to their sister wife? Or was it sometimes a purely pragmatic arrangement, albeit one cloaked in divine rhetoric? Historians still argue whether all such unions were consummated in the same way, or if some marriages were more symbolic or ceremonial, particularly if the main goal was to legitimize a line rather than necessarily produce direct offspring from that specific pairing. Consider the political reality. Marrying a sister or half-sister was an incredibly effective way to keep power and wealth concentrated within the ruling family. It prevented powerful noble families from gaining too much influence by marrying into the direct line of succession. By keeping the royal blood pure, you, the pharaoh, were also keeping the royal power uncontested. It was a pragmatic move hidden behind a veil of divine mandate. A quirky tidbit: sometimes, these unions might have involved individuals of very different ages. For example, a much older pharaoh marrying a very young half-sister, which further suggests the ceremonial or political nature might have overshadowed romantic love. Moreover, while the great royal wife, often the sister, held immense religious and symbolic importance, pharaohs also maintained extensive harems with numerous secondary wives and concubines. These other wives, often from noble Egyptian families or even foreign princesses, as we'll discuss later, played crucial roles in producing additional heirs and forging alliances. This layered marital structure meant that while the sister wife held the primary sacred position, the pharaoh's intimate life wasn't exclusively limited to that single, often incestuous union. It's like having a highly decorated ceremonial front door, but a whole complex of other entrances for everyday use. The public's perception also plays a role. While the elite and educated might have fully grasped the theological justifications for royal incest, it's difficult to gauge how the average Egyptian farmer viewed these practices. Did they see it as truly divine, or just a peculiar quirk of the untouchable royal family? Most would likely have accepted it as part of the pharaoh's mysterious sacred existence, a facet of their god, king's unique life that was beyond mortal understanding. You wouldn't question the sun god's methods, would you? So, while the pharaoh's incestuous marriages were deeply rooted in a religious and ritualistic framework, their reality was a blend of divine imitation, political strategy, and human dynamics. It was a complex tapestry where sacred belief intertwined with pragmatic rule, creating a system that, to us, seems unbelievable, but to them, was simply the way of the gods. You've just grappled with the nuanced distinction between the ritualistic and realistic aspects of the pharaoh's incestuous marriages. Now, let's widen our lens even further to understand how these extraordinary unions weren't just about divine purity, they were also formidable power plays, calculated strategic tools for consolidating authority and maintaining the stability of the vast Egyptian kingdom. You are about to see that the royal bedroom was, at times, as much a battlefield of influence as any political arena. Imagine you are a shrewd pharaoh, navigating a complex court filled with ambitious nobles, powerful priests, and perhaps even murmuring generals. Your primary objective, beyond pleasing the gods, is to ensure the uninterrupted continuation of your dynasty and the unquestioned authority of your rule. How do you achieve this? One highly effective method was through meticulously planned marriages. This is a mainstream historical fact. Royal marriages in ancient Egypt, especially within the immediate family, were crucial instruments for concentrating power, wealth, and legitimacy within the ruling house, preventing challenges from powerful external factions. It was like a game of chess, but played with human pawns and very, very high stakes. By marrying a sister, a half-sister, or even a daughter, you, the pharaoh, were essentially creating a closed circuit of power. This prevented powerful noble families from marrying their daughters into the direct royal line, and thereby gaining a legitimate claim to the throne for their offspring. If your successor was always born of a union within the most sacred and undeniable royal bloodline, then the chances of external challenges to the succession were significantly reduced. It ensured that the ultimate power remained within the hands of the children of Ra, those uniquely blessed with divine ancestry. It's a quirky tidbit that a practice so often associated with biology might have been, at its heart, an exercise in pure political engineering. Consider the immense wealth and land controlled by the royal family. Marrying outside this tight circle meant diluting that wealth, or granting external families a share in the immense royal patrimony. By keeping marriages in-house, you maintained exclusive control over vast estates, temples, and resources that funded the entire machinery of the state. This wasn't just about legitimacy, it was about economic power. You wouldn't want your distant cousin suddenly having a legitimate claim to a third of the Delta's grain harvest, would you? Furthermore, these marriages often served to unify different branches of the royal family or to re-legitimize a new dynasty. If a pharaoh came to power through less than direct means, perhaps through military might or a coup, marrying a daughter or sister of the previous, more legitimate line could instantly bolster his claim to the throne. It provided a vital symbolic link to the established order, smoothing over any potential unrest or challenges to his authority. It was a clever way to say, "Look, I'm literally joined at the hip with the old guard." The practice also reinforced the pharaoh's unique position as the living god. By marrying a divine consort, as the sister wife was often perceived, you were not just a political ruler but a cosmic one, whose very family structure mirrored the heavens. This elevated your status far above any mere mortal politician or military leader, making your authority seem unquestionable and God-given. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for royal incest was always religious, or if pragmatic political considerations often outweighed the theological ones, leading to a convenient divine justification for a power-consolidating strategy. So, while we focused on the religious and biological aspects of these unbelievable sexual practices, remember that they were also intensely practical power plays. You, the pharaoh, used your family and your marriage choices as strategic tools, ensuring your dynasty's survival and the unchallenged stability of your reign. The royal bedchamber was, in essence, another chamber of state, where alliances were forged and power was meticulously preserved. You've uncovered the profound political calculations behind the pharaoh's close-kin marriages, understanding them as strategic power plays. Now, let's consider a fascinating counterpoint to these closed-circle unions, the occasional yet significant integration of foreign brides into the royal lineage. You'll find that while the emphasis was often on maintaining a pure Egyptian bloodline, diplomacy sometimes necessitated pragmatic exceptions, bringing new faces and different customs into the heart of the royal family. Imagine you are a powerful pharaoh, ruling over a prosperous Egypt, but constantly navigating the complex geopolitical landscape of the ancient Near East. You have neighbors, the Mitanni, the Hittites, the Babylonians, who are rivals, allies, and always potential threats. How do you forge strong bonds and ensure peace without resorting to constant warfare? One of the most effective tools in your diplomatic arsenal was the exchange of royal daughters. This is a mainstream historical fact. Pharaohs, particularly during the New Kingdom, frequently engaged in diplomatic marriages, taking foreign princesses as secondary wives to secure alliances, maintain peace, and project Egypt's international influence. It was like an ancient version of a strategic corporate merger, but with people instead of companies. These foreign brides rarely, if ever, held the exalted status of the great royal wife, especially if that title was already held by a royal sister. Their primary role was often to serve as a living symbol of an alliance, a guarantee of peace between nations. You, the pharaoh, might receive a daughter from the king of Mitanni, for example, along with a dowry of precious goods and a retinue of foreign servants. She would join your extensive harem, bringing with her new customs, languages, and sometimes even new deities. It's a quirky tidbit that these princesses often came with hundreds of attendants, including female singers and musicians, effectively creating little foreign enclaves within the Egyptian court. The Amarna letters, a trove of diplomatic correspondence dating from the 14th century BC, provide a vivid glimpse into these international marriages. You can read actual letters exchanged between pharaohs like Amenhotep III and Akhenaten and their counterparts in Babylon, Mitanni, and Assyria. Foreign kings would often explicitly request Egyptian princesses for their own harems. However, the pharaohs almost always refused to send their own daughters abroad, citing a tradition that the daughter of the king of Egypt has never been given to anyone. This put you, the pharaoh, in a uniquely powerful position. You received brides, but rarely gave them. It was a clear demonstration of Egypt's superior standing on the international stage, a subtle flex of diplomatic muscle. While these foreign queens were important for political reasons, their children, if any, generally did not have a strong claim to the main throne, which was typically reserved for the offspring of the great royal wife. This maintained the sanctity of the pure Egyptian divine bloodline while still allowing for practical diplomatic relations. Historians still argue whether foreign princesses genuinely integrated into Egyptian court life or largely remained within their own foreign enclaves, preserving their cultural identity. The integration of foreign brides meant that Egyptian court life sometimes became a fascinating melting pot of cultures. New foods, fashions, and even religious ideas could trickle in through these princesses and their entourages. You might find yourself enjoying a Babylonian dish or listening to a Mitannian lullaby, all thanks to a diplomatic marriage. It offered a glimpse of the wider world within the very insular royal palace. So, while the deeply rooted tradition of incest ensured the divine purity and political concentration of power within the pharaoh's immediate family, the strategic acquisition of foreign brides served a different, equally vital purpose: to project Egypt's power abroad, secure vital alliances, and maintain peace across the ancient world. It showed a sophisticated understanding of both internal and external affairs, where even the most personal of unions served the grander purpose of state. You've just seen how foreign brides, while secondary, played a crucial role in diplomatic power plays, adding layers of international intrigue to the pharaoh's marital landscape. Now, let's zoom in on a truly transformative, yet ultimately fleeting, period in ancient Egyptian history, the Amarna Revolution. You'll discover how one pharaoh's radical religious shift profoundly, albeit temporarily, impacted the dynamics of the royal family, even influencing how their most intimate relationships were presented to the world. Imagine a world turned upside down. For centuries, Egypt had worshipped a pantheon of gods, with Amun-Ra as the supreme state deity. But then came Akhenaten, a pharaoh who ascended the throne around 1353 BC. He wasn't just a reformer, he was a revolutionary. This is a mainstream historical fact. Akhenaten instigated a radical religious upheaval, attempting to shift Egypt from polytheism to the worship of a single, supreme sun disk deity, the Aten, effectively sidelining the powerful priesthood of Amun. It was like a modern-day CEO deciding to completely rebrand a centuries-old, incredibly successful company overnight, risking everything. You can almost hear the gasps from the traditionalists. This religious revolution had profound implications for the royal family. Akhenaten not only moved the capital from Thebes to a new, purpose-built city he named Akhetaten, modern Amarna, but he also introduced a new artistic style that was shockingly different from the rigid, idealized forms of traditional Egyptian art. In this new style, you'd see a focus on naturalism and, most strikingly, an unprecedented depiction of the royal family in scenes of intimate domesticity. Suddenly, you, the pharaoh, Akhenaten, were shown in tender, even affectionate moments with your great royal wife, Nefertiti, and your 6 daughters. You see them playing, embracing, or even kissing, bathed in the life-giving rays of the Aten. Nefertiti herself was elevated to an almost unprecedented level of prominence, often depicted as Akhenaten's equal in religious ceremonies, even striking down enemies in battle scenes. This level of public intimacy and shared power was a complete break from tradition. It's a quirky tidbit that a pharaoh, whose religious reforms were so radical, also brought such a human, almost vulnerable face to the royal family in public art. But what about the traditional incestuous marriages? While Akhenaten's primary queen was Nefertiti, whose exact lineage is still debated, though she was likely of royal descent, possibly a cousin, he also continued some of the royal traditions. As you recall, his son and successor, Tutankhamun, was the product of a union between Akhenaten and his own sister, the mummy known as the Younger Lady. Akhenaten himself is also believed to have married some of his own daughters, notably Meritaten and Ankhesempaten, who later became Ankhesenamun, Tutankhamun's wife. These were likely pragmatic moves to ensure succession within his new religious order, especially as his primary wife, Nefertiti, produced only daughters. The Amarna period represents a fascinating tension between tradition and radical change. While Akhenaten embraced a singular god and an unprecedented artistic realism, he still relied on the long-standing practice of close-kin marriage to secure his divine lineage, albeit within his new theological framework. Historians still argue whether Akhenaten's depiction of family intimacy was a genuine reflection of his personal beliefs or a deliberate propaganda tool to promote his new, family-centric religion, placing the royal family at the heart of the Aten's worship. Ultimately, the Amarna revolution was short-lived. After Akhenaten's death, there was a swift return to traditional polytheism, and the legacy of the Aten and Akhenaten himself was largely erased from historical records. The intimate family scenes disappeared from public art, and the strict, idealized forms of traditional Egyptian art returned. The unique presentation of the royal family during this period stands as a fascinating blip in a history otherwise dominated by a more formalized, less outwardly intimate portrayal of their divine rulers. You've witnessed the brief, yet profound, artistic, and religious shifts of the Amarna period, where pharaonic intimacy was briefly put on public display. Now, let's fast forward past the dust of fallen empires and the shifting sands of time to how later cultures viewed or misunderstood ancient Egyptian sexual practices. You'll find that as the millennia rolled by, the once sacred and often open attitudes of the Egyptians transformed, leading to judgment, sensationalism, and a surprising amount of historical misinterpretation. Imagine ancient Rome, centuries after the last pharaoh. Roman historians and writers, while often fascinated by Egypt, viewed its customs through their own cultural lens, which was far more rigid regarding family structures and public morality. When they encountered accounts of Egyptian pharaohs marrying their sisters or even daughters, their reaction was often one of shock and condemnation. This is a mainstream historical fact. Later Roman writers often expressed scandalized views of royal incest in Egypt, failing to fully grasp its deeply religious and dynastic justifications within the Egyptian worldview. For them, it was simply barbaric or immoral. It's a bit like trying to explain quantum physics to someone who only understands basic arithmetic. The concepts just don't compute. This misunderstanding wasn't limited to incest. The frankness of Egyptian art, which depicted nudity and fertility symbols without shame, was often misinterpreted as a sign of hedonism or excessive sensuality by cultures with more conservative sensibilities. What was a sacred representation of life-giving power to the Egyptians might have been seen as crude or even pornographic by later viewers. You can imagine a stuffy Roman senator tutting at a depiction of the god Min, entirely missing the profound religious meaning. A quirky tidbit is that this selective interpretation often led to sensationalized accounts of Egyptian debauchery in later historical writings, fueling popular myths that persist even today. As Christianity and later Islam spread throughout Egypt, the original religious justifications for pharaonic practices, especially those deemed taboo by the new faiths, were lost or deliberately suppressed. The concept of incest, once a divine imitation, became unequivocally sinful. The open display of sexuality in art was either destroyed, defaced, or reinterpreted through a moralizing lens. The nuances of ancient Egyptian beliefs faded, replaced by judgments based on entirely different moral frameworks. You wouldn't find a medieval monk praising the eternal orgasm concept, that's for sure. This process of reinterpretation continued into the modern era, particularly with the rediscovery of ancient Egypt in the 19th century. Early Egyptologists, often products of Victorian morality, frequently struggled to reconcile their fascination with ancient Egypt's grandeur with what they perceived as its unseemly sexual practices. They might have downplayed these aspects, or explained them away as isolated quirks rather than integral parts of the culture. It's a bit like finding out your favorite historical hero had a rather scandalous secret hobby. You might try to ignore it or rationalize it. Historians still argue whether some early Western interpretations of ancient Egyptian sexuality were more reflective of Victorian prudery than accurate scholarship, leading to a sanitization of historical realities. The legacy of these misunderstandings means that even today, when people learn about pharaonic incest, the initial reaction is often shock, rather than an understanding of the complex religious and political motivations behind it. It requires a conscious effort to shed modern prejudices and step into the mindset of the ancient world. You have to actively try to see through their eyes, not just your own. So, while the ancient Egyptians proudly etched their beliefs and practices into stone, the changing tides of cultural values meant that their unbelievable sexual practices would become subjects of misunderstanding, moral judgment, and sensationalism for centuries to come. It's a powerful reminder that history is always interpreted through the lens of the present, for better or for worse. You've seen how later, cultures often misjudged ancient Egyptian intimacy, projecting their own morals onto the pharaoh's world. Now, let's consider the enduring fascination with ancient Egyptian royal lives, particularly their unique customs. You'll find that despite centuries of misinterpretation, the magnetic pull of their world, even its most unbelievable aspects, continues to captivate and educate us. Imagine yourself scrolling through countless documentaries, books, and articles about ancient Egypt. What is it that truly grabs your attention? Is it just the gold and the grandeur? Or is it the glimpse into a profoundly different way of thinking about life, death, and the divine? The answer is often a complex blend of both. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egypt continues to be one of the most popular and extensively studied civilizations, captivating audiences worldwide with its mysteries, monumental achievements, and unique societal structures, including its royal customs. It's like the ultimate historical drama, with a cast of characters who were literally considered gods. The unbelievable sexual practices of the pharaohs, the divine incest, the explicit art, the expectation of eternal potency are often precisely the elements that make them so endlessly fascinating. They challenge our modern assumptions about morality, family, and the role of religion in daily life. You, the modern observer, are confronted with a worldview so alien, yet so intricately logical within its own context, that it forces you to question your own cultural biases. It's a bit like trying to understand a dream where everything makes perfect sense inside the dream, but seems utterly bizarre once you wake up. This enduring appeal isn't just about sensationalism. For scholars, these practices offer vital clues into the deepest layers of Egyptian belief. Understanding why a pharaoh would marry his sister helps unlock their cosmology, their theories of kingship, and their unique understanding of creation and rebirth. It's a puzzle that, when solved, illuminates far more than just bedroom habits. Historians still argue whether the continuous public interest in the more sensational aspects of Egyptian royalty sometimes overshadows a deeper, more academic understanding of their complex society. The very concept of a living god-king, whose actions directly influence the cosmic order, is profoundly compelling. You can imagine the immense pressure and responsibility resting on the pharaoh's shoulders. His marriages weren't just personal choices. They were acts of state, designed to ensure the very survival of the Nile, the crops, and the people. This grand scale of personal responsibility tied to national prosperity is a uniquely Egyptian narrative that continues to resonate. A quirky tidbit is that the sheer durability of their monuments, from pyramids to temples, almost seems to reflect their belief in eternal life, and this physical endurance contributes to our unending fascination. Furthermore, the blend of the sacred and the sensual, often seen as contradictory in many other cultures, is a striking feature of ancient Egypt that continues to intrigue. Their comfort with depicting the human body and its generative functions in religious contexts forces us to reconsider our own boundaries and taboos. It's a powerful reminder that what one culture deems sacred, another might deem profane, and vice versa. You might even find yourself admiring their refreshingly direct approach to the facts of life. So, despite the centuries that separate us, and despite the layers of misinterpretation that have accumulated, the world of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, with all its unbelievable customs, continues to exert a powerful pull. It serves as a constant invitation to look beyond the familiar and embrace the extraordinary, reminding you that history is always richer and stranger than you might initially imagine. You felt the enduring magnetic pull of ancient Egyptian royalty, even through their most unconventional practices. Now, as we approach the twilight of our journey through their intimate lives, let's consider the bigger picture, how understanding these unbelievable aspects truly helps us unravel the Nile's secrets. You'll discover that appreciating their unique sexual practices isn't just about sensationalism. It's a key to unlocking a more complete, nuanced understanding of their entire civilization. Imagine trying to understand a complex tapestry by only looking at one thread. You'd miss the intricate patterns, the vibrant colors, the entire story it tells. The same goes for ancient Egypt. If you only focus on the pyramids and the gods in isolation, without comprehending the profound connections between kingship, religion, fertility, and even royal intimate lives, you miss the true essence of their culture. This is a mainstream historical fact. A comprehensive understanding of ancient Egyptian society necessitates examining the intricate relationships between their religious beliefs, political structures, and daily practices, including those concerning sexuality and family. It's like trying to understand a highly sophisticated machine by only looking at its shiny exterior. You need to understand its inner workings. The unbelievable sexual practices of the pharaohs, particularly the divine incest, serve as a perfect lens through which to view their unique cosmology. Remember Atum's self-creation and the Osiris-Isis myth? These weren't just bedtime stories. They were fundamental truths that shaped the very role of the pharaoh. By embracing these practices, the the pharaoh was not just a political ruler but a living embodiment of divine power, actively participating in the cosmic drama of creation and renewal. You can't truly grasp the pharaoh's authority or the devotion of their people without understanding this underlying spiritual justification for their intimate choices. It's a bit like trying to understand modern parliamentary democracy without knowing what an election is. Furthermore, exploring these practices illuminates the surprising aspects of ancient Egyptian society, like the rights of women. While the pharaoh might have been engaging in unions that seem shocking to us, the average Egyptian woman had legal agency unheard of in many other ancient cultures. This contrast challenges simplistic notions of ancient equals backward, and reveals a society with its own internal logic and progressive elements. It's a quirky tidbit that a culture that allowed brother-sister marriages for its kings also gave its women more legal freedom than many parts of the world would for millennia. The sheer openness about sexuality in their art and texts also forces us to rethink our assumptions about ancient modesty. It tells you that the Egyptians had a healthy, integrated view of the human body and its functions, seeing them as part of the natural, divine order, rather than something to be hidden or ashamed of. This perspective is a crucial piece of the puzzle in understanding their worldview. Historians still argue whether the apparent lack of sexual prudery in ancient Egypt truly reflects a generally permissive society, or if artistic representations were often highly symbolic and restricted to specific contexts. Ultimately, by confronting the unbelievable, you gain a deeper appreciation for the ancient Egyptians' ingenuity, their unique philosophical framework, and their pragmatic approaches to life's challenges, from childbirth to dynastic succession. It allows you to see them not just as a civilization of grand monuments, but as living, breathing people with complex beliefs and intimate lives that were profoundly intertwined with their spiritual universe. You come to understand that their world, though distant, was as rich and intricate as our own, simply operating on a different set of rules. So, as you slowly emerge from the depths of their history, remember that these seemingly unbelievable practices are not just isolated curiosities. They are integral threads in the rich tapestry of ancient Egypt, helping you to truly unravel the timeless secrets of the Nile. You've delved deep into the fascinating intricacies of ancient Egyptian intimate practices, understanding how they help unravel the broader secrets of the Nile. Now, let's bring it full circle and specifically focus on the unique role of pharaohs in ensuring the cosmic order and the very fertility of Egypt. You'll realize that their actions, even the most personal ones, were believed to have direct, tangible consequences on the well-being of the entire land. Imagine you are living in ancient Egypt, a land utterly dependent on the annual flood of the Nile. Your crops, your livelihood, your very survival hinge on that precious water and the fertile silt it brings. Who do you look to as the guarantor of this life-giving miracle? Not merely to the gods in the heavens, but to you, the pharaoh, their living embodiment on earth. This is a mainstream historical fact. The pharaoh was considered the intermediary between humanity and the gods, and his well-being, vitality, and even his sexual potency were believed to directly influence the prosperity, stability, and fertility of Egypt. It was a symbiotic relationship, a cosmic partnership between king and country. Think back to the creation myth of Atum, self-generating new life. You, as pharaoh, were seen as the living conduit of that primeval creative force. Your strength, your health, and crucially your virility were not just personal attributes, they were national assets. If you were potent, then the Nile would rise abundantly, the fields would yield bountiful harvests, and the people would multiply. If your vitality waned, it was believed to threaten the very fabric of existence, potentially leading to famine or chaos. This placed an enormous burden on you, the pharaoh, far beyond typical kingly duties. It's a bit like being responsible for ensuring the sun rises every morning, except instead of just hoping it does, you actually have to do something to make it happen. This belief manifested in various ways. The grand festivals, like the Sed Festival, the Jubilee, you heard about earlier, were critical reenactments of your regenerative powers. During this festival, you, the pharaoh, would perform ritualistic runs and ceremonies, physically demonstrating your continued strength and fitness to rule. But beneath the athletic display lay a deeper message. Your enduring vitality would translate directly into the land's continued fertility. It was a public affirmation of your sacred role as the source of all abundance. Historians still argue whether the physical feats performed during the said festival were literal endurance tests for aging pharaohs or primarily symbolic representations of renewed vigor. The continuous production of heirs, especially sons, was also paramount. Each new royal birth was a testament to your ongoing potency and the strength of the divine lineage. It wasn't just about securing the succession, it was about demonstrating that the sacred life force was still flowing powerfully through the royal line, ensuring a future for Egypt. You needed not just an heir, but a legitimate heir, born of the right unions, to perpetuate this divine connection. A quirky tidbit is that the very act of naming a pharaoh could imbue them with cosmic power, linking their destiny directly to the well-being of the two lands. So, from your earliest days on the throne to your very last breath, your intimate life, your physical health, and your capacity for procreation were not merely private matters. They were public spectacles of divine authority, crucial for maintaining the delicate balance of Ma'at, the ancient Egyptian concept of cosmic order, justice, and harmony. Every action you took, every life you brought forth, echoed the primordial creation and reinforced the belief that you, the pharaoh, were the living engine of Egypt's prosperity. You've explored the pharaoh's direct, almost physical responsibility for Egypt's cosmic order and fertility. Now, let's consider a less pleasant but equally real aspect of their existence: the potential for internal conflicts and court intrigues. You'll discover that while the pharaoh was a god-king, the world around them was still full of ambitious individuals, making the royal court a hotbed of whispers, plots, and dangerous power struggles. Imagine you are a powerful court official, perhaps a vizier or a high priest. You serve the pharaoh, but you also have your own ambitions, your own family's interests, and perhaps a desire for more influence. The concentration of power in a single, divinely appointed individual, even a god-king, inevitably creates tension among those who orbit that power. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian courts, like those of many absolute monarchies, were often sites of intense political maneuvering, rivalries among nobles, and occasional conspiracies aimed at influencing or even deposing the pharaoh. It's like a never-ending season of a high-stakes reality show, but with actual lives and kingdoms on the line. The very nature of the pharaoh's multiple wives and concubines, while divinely justified for procreation and alliances, also created fertile ground for rivalry. Each royal woman, especially those who bore sons, would naturally seek to advance her own child's position, hoping he would become the next pharaoh. You can imagine the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, competition among the queens, each vying for the pharaoh's favor and to ensure her son was seen as the most suitable heir. It's a bit like a highly competitive corporate ladder, but the next CEO is chosen based on divine favor and careful strategizing within the royal bedroom. One of the most chilling examples of such intrigue can be found in the Harem conspiracy during the reign of Ramesses III in the 12th century BC. You, the listener, might be familiar with the great warrior pharaohs, but even they weren't immune. In this plot, one of Ramesses III's secondary wives, Tiye, conspired with several high-ranking officials to assassinate the pharaoh and place her son, Pentawere, on the throne. The conspiracy was discovered, and the perpetrators faced brutal justice, as detailed in the judicial papyri that survived. This grisly episode reveals that even the sacred person of the pharaoh was not entirely beyond mortal reach, and that ambition could override even the fear of divine retribution. Historians still argue whether the conspiracy truly aimed for assassination or primarily to influence the succession, but the severity of the punishment suggests a grave threat was perceived. The role of eunuchs, while perhaps less prominent than in some other ancient empires, also played a part in court dynamics. Eunuchs, often trusted guardians of the royal women and children, could become powerful figures due to their access to the royal family. Their unique position, being outside the normal lineage of power, could make them either fiercely loyal or at times dangerous manipulators within the confines of the harem. A quirky tidbit is that some records suggest eunuchs occasionally held very high administrative positions, indicating the level of trust placed in them despite their physical alteration. So, while your pharaoh presented an image of divine tranquility and absolute power, beneath the surface, the royal court was a swirling vortex of human ambition, alliances, and betrayals. Every marriage, every birth, every appointment was scrutinized, opening pathways for those eager to climb the slippery pole of power. It reminds you that even in a world of god-kings, the human element, with all its flaws and aspirations, was never far from the throne. You've seen the dangerous currents of court intrigue swirling beneath the pharaoh's serene surface. Now, let's consider a fascinating aspect of royal life that, while seemingly restrictive, sometimes provided a unique form of stability and influence for royal women. Their occasional, yet crucial, roles as regents. You'll discover that even in a highly patriarchal society, circumstances could elevate powerful queens to act as supreme rulers in the name of a child pharaoh, wielding immense temporary authority. Imagine the unthinkable. You, the reigning pharaoh, pass away, leaving behind a young son, perhaps a mere boy, too young to govern the vast, complex machinery of Egypt. What happens then? The kingdom cannot simply halt. In such critical moments, the power often fell to the boy king's mother, the great royal wife, who would step into the breach as regent. This is a mainstream historical fact. Numerous queens in ancient Egypt, particularly during periods of dynastic uncertainty, or when a child inherited the throne, served as powerful regents, effectively ruling the country until their sons came of age. It was like being the temporary CEO of the most powerful corporation on earth, with the full authority of the board behind you. One of the most famous examples, though she eventually became pharaoh in her own right, is Hatshepsut. While she initially ruled as regent for her stepson Thutmose III, her ambition and political acumen led her to eventually proclaim herself pharaoh, adopting the full regalia and titles, even wearing a false beard. Her story shows the immense power a queen could wield if she was capable, and the circumstances allowed. You can almost hear the court whispers, "She's just a regent," or is she? Another significant regent was Tuzret, who ruled as regent for Siptah and later perhaps for herself, during a tumultuous period at the end of the 19th dynasty. Or consider the formidable Ahotep I, mother of Ahmose I, who helped found the 18th dynasty. She played a critical role in rallying forces and maintaining stability during a war against the Hyksos invaders, serving as a powerful figure in her young son's early reign. These women weren't just placeholders, they were active rulers, making crucial decisions, managing the economy, commanding the military, and overseeing building projects. It's a quirky tidbit that a society so obsessed with male divine kingship often relied on the strength and intellect of its queens during its most vulnerable moments. The role of regent for a child pharaoh was challenging. You, as the queen mother, had to maintain the delicate balance of power, appease ambitious nobles, ensure the loyalty of the army, and continue the ritualistic duties of the pharaoh, all while guiding your young son towards his eventual rule. It required extraordinary political skill, wisdom, and often an iron will. Your actions as regent were crucial for maintaining Ma'at, cosmic order, during a period of potential instability. Historians still argue whether the concept of a female pharaoh, like Hatshepsut, was truly accepted by the populace, or if it remained a source of underlying tension and controversy, even during her successful reign. These regencies highlight the often overlooked power of royal women in ancient Egypt. While the divine incest we discussed might seem to define their primary role, their capabilities extended far beyond the royal bedchamber. They were custodians of the dynasty, guardians of the realm, and at times the true embodiment of pharaonic authority, even if temporarily. You can almost see them, stern and intelligent, guiding the hands of their young sons, whispering wisdom that would shape the future of Egypt. You've explored the formidable power wielded by royal women as regents, stepping in to guide the destiny of Egypt during times of youthful succession. Now, let's consider how, even with such profound responsibilities, the fundamental daily lives of royal women, including the pharaoh's wives and daughters, still encompass deeply traditional roles. Making camps and transporting supplies for the army, you'll discover that behind the glittering titles and divine associations lay a pragmatic expectation of contribution, even for those at the very pinnacle of society. Imagine the vast scale of an ancient Egyptian military campaign. Moving an army, even a relatively modest one, across the desert required immense logistical effort. Food, water, equipment, tents, and provisions for thousands of soldiers and their beasts of burden. This wasn't a task left solely to male quartermasters. This is a mainstream historical fact. Royal women, particularly during military campaigns, were often involved in the logistical support of the army, overseeing the creation of temporary camps and the transportation of vital supplies. It was a crucial, if often overlooked, contribution to the success of military endeavours. It's like discovering that the Queen of England also moonlights as a very efficient, highly organised battlefield logistics manager, ensuring everyone has their tea and biscuits. This involvement wasn't necessarily about them physically hoisting sacks of grain or driving chariots, though you wouldn't put it past some of the more formidable queens. Rather, it involved their organisational and managerial skills. As prominent figures in the royal household, they had the authority and resources to mobilise a large workforce, servants, slaves, and royal administrators, to prepare and move these supplies. You, as a royal woman, might oversee the packing of vast quantities of dried fish and bread, the gathering of water skins, or the preparation of medical supplies, ensuring that everything reached the troops efficiently. This was a critical administrative role, directly contributing to the pharaoh's military might. Historians still argue whether royal women's involvement was always direct oversight, or if it primarily involved the delegation of tasks through their extensive household staff and influence. This practice also underscores a broader cultural expectation in ancient Egypt. Everyone, regardless of their status, had a role to play in maintaining the prosperity and security of the land. For royal women, even those married to the divine pharaoh, this meant contributing in tangible, practical ways to the state's most vital functions, including warfare. It wasn't just about sitting on a throne looking regal. It was about active participation in the practicalities of governance. A quirky tidbit is that even the most elaborate royal tents and movable palaces for the pharaoh on campaign would have required significant logistical planning, often overseen by the royal household, which was largely run by women. Moreover, the presence of royal women, even if behind the scenes in logistical roles, could serve a symbolic purpose. Their involvement subtly reinforced the unity of the royal family with the military, suggesting that the entire kingdom, from the divine pharaoh to his wives, was committed to the success of the campaign. It provided a morale boost, demonstrating that even the highest echelons of society were invested in the soldiers' well-being and the national effort. You can imagine the soldiers feeling a boost, knowing the Queen herself was making sure their supplies arrived. So, while the pharaoh was busy securing cosmic order and fathering heirs, and the great royal wife might be ruling as regent, even their most intimate female family members engaged in the practical, hands-on work of state, ensuring the army was fed, watered, and ready for battle. It adds another layer of surprising practicality to the lives of those at the very top of Egyptian society, reminding you that even god-kings and their consorts had very real, tangible responsibilities beyond the purely divine. You've just seen how even the most exalted royal women contributed practically to the state by managing army logistics. Now, let's shift our focus to a fundamental aspect of life that spanned all social strata, from the humblest peasant to you, the pharaoh. Raising children was the responsibility of both parents, and marriages were arranged by both families. You'll find a surprising emphasis on shared parental duties and collective family involvement in establishing new unions. Imagine a bustling ancient Egyptian household, perhaps a small farmstead or a craftsman's workshop. When a new child arrived, it wasn't solely the mother's burden to raise them. This is a mainstream historical fact, as documented in various ancient Egyptian texts and social records. The upbringing of children was a shared responsibility between both parents, with fathers playing an active and engaged role in their children's lives. This contrasts sharply with some other ancient societies where child rearing was almost exclusively seen as the mother's domain. You might see a father teaching his son a trade or even playing games with his daughters, demonstrating a level of paternal involvement that feels remarkably modern. It's a bit like seeing a dad today doing the school run, but instead of a minivan, he's steering a reed boat down the Nile. Fathers were expected to provide for their children, educate them, whether in a formal school or through apprenticeship in a family trade, and instill moral values. Wisdom texts often advise fathers on how to raise dutiful and respectful children. You, as a pharaoh, would also be involved in the education and training of your children, especially your sons, who were being groomed for leadership. While you'd have tutors and attendants, the ultimate responsibility and guidance still rested with you. This shared parental role fostered stronger family bonds and provided children with both male and female influences throughout their development. Historians still argue whether the apparent egalitarianism in parental roles translated consistently across all social classes, or if it was more idealized in textual portrayals than universally practiced. When it came to marriage, the decision wasn't left solely to the individuals, especially for the first marriage. Instead, it was very much a collective family endeavor. This is a mainstream historical fact. As you recall from our earlier discussion on commoner marriages, unions were typically arranged by both families involved. The parents, sometimes with the consultation of wider relatives, would assess the suitability of a match based on economic considerations, social standing, and the potential for a stable, productive household. You wouldn't simply elope with the first person who caught your eye. Your family's reputation and future were intrinsically linked to your marital choice. It's a quirky tidbit that while love songs celebrated individual passion, the practicalities of marriage were often rooted in collective family strategy, ensuring everyone was on board. The arrangement process wasn't necessarily forced. While parents initiated and oversaw the process, there's evidence that the preferences of the prospective bride and groom could be taken into account, especially as they got older. The goal was to create a harmonious union that benefited both families and provided a solid foundation for the new couple. Gifts would be exchanged, not necessarily as a bride price or dowry in the modern sense, but as contributions to the new household, solidifying the agreement between the families. So, from the daily task of raising children to the momentous decision of arranging a marriage, ancient Egyptian society emphasized collective responsibility and familial bonds. It reveals a cultural value that saw the family unit as the cornerstone of society, where both parents contributed to nurturing the next generation, and new unions were forged with the careful consideration and blessing of the entire clan. It certainly highlights a strong community focus that might feel quite different from today's more individualized approach to family matters. You've just explored the communal nature of child rearing and arranged marriages in ancient Egypt, revealing a society deeply rooted in familial responsibility. Now, let's bring our journey to a close by considering how all these individual threads, from the pharaoh's unbelievable practices to the daily lives of commoners, collectively contribute to unraveling the Nile's enduring secrets. You'll see that every detail, no matter how intimate or seemingly strange, adds a vital brushstroke to the grand portrait of this remarkable civilization. Imagine an archaeologist carefully brushing away sand from a long-buried artifact. Each tiny piece, whether a king's golden mask or a simple peasant's cooking pot, offers a clue, a whisper from the past. The same applies to understanding the intimate lives of the ancient Egyptians. When you truly grasp the context behind the pharaohs' incestuous marriages, the openness of their art, or their innovative approaches to contraception, you're not just collecting sensational facts. You are gaining deeper insights into their complex belief systems, their social structures, and their unique relationship with life, death, and the divine. This is a mainstream historical fact. A holistic understanding of ancient Egypt, including its private and sexual practices, is essential for a complete interpretation of its culture, religion, and societal norms. It's like finding the missing piece of a jigsaw puzzle that suddenly brings the whole picture into sharp focus. These unbelievable sexual practices are not anomalies to be dismissed. They are integral components of a worldview fundamentally different from our own. They force you, the modern observer, to shed preconceived notions and engage with a logic that is uniquely Egyptian. For example, understanding that royal incest was a deliberate imitation of the gods, Osiris and Isis, transforms it from a shocking taboo into a profound religious act of cosmic significance. This shift in perspective is crucial for moving beyond mere judgment to genuine comprehension. Historians still argue whether certain aspects of ancient Egyptian private life, especially those involving sexuality, are fully understood due to the limitations of surviving texts and the potential for modern biases in interpretation. Consider the interplay of their beliefs. The pharaoh's direct responsibility for the Nile's fertility, intertwined with his own virility and the expectation of eternal potency, creates a consistent, powerful narrative. You see how every aspect of their lives, from the grandest temple ceremony to the most personal act of procreation, was imbued with sacred meaning. This intricate web of interconnected beliefs is what makes Egyptian civilization so rich and compelling. A quirky tidbit is that the very language of ancient Egypt, with its use of hieroglyphs that could be both literal and symbolic, often lends itself to these multi-layered interpretations of life and meaning. Moreover, the revelations about women's legal rights and their participation in shared parental duties remind us that ancient societies were rarely monolithic. Despite the seeming rigidity of some traditions, pockets of surprising progress and individual agency existed. This encourages you to look beyond simple labels and appreciate the subtle complexities of their social fabric. So, as you reflect on this journey through the pharaoh's most unbelievable sexual practices, remember that each detail, no matter how unusual, serves a vital purpose. It helps us to bridge the vast expanse of time, allowing us to connect with the people of ancient Egypt, not just as figures from dusty textbooks, but as complex individuals living in a world brimming with its own unique logic and profound spiritual depth. You've explored how even the most intimate aspects of ancient Egyptian life serve to unravel the broader secrets of the Nile. Now, let's pivot slightly to emphasize the enduring, almost timeless nature of these insights, as we consider how understanding their complex, unbelievable world continues to fascinate and inform us in the present day. You'll realize that the echoes of their civilization, particularly their unique blend of the sacred and the sensual, resonate far beyond the sands of time. Imagine a modern research team, perhaps geneticists and Egyptologists, collaborating to analyze a pharaoh's mummy, unraveling centuries of mystery with cutting-edge technology. The very questions they ask, about lineage, health, and familial relationships, are directly informed by the unbelievable sexual practices you've been learning about. The initial shock gives way to a deeper scientific and historical inquiry, pushing the boundaries of our knowledge. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ongoing scientific research, particularly DNA analysis of mummified remains, continues to provide new insights into ancient Egyptian royal family dynamics and health, often confirming or challenging long-held historical theories. It's like cold case forensics, but on a truly grand, millennia-spanning scale. The enduring interest isn't just academic, it's deeply human. The ancient Egyptians, despite their radical differences in customs, grappled with universal themes: love, loss, fertility, power, and the search for meaning in life and after death. Their unique approaches to these themes, often expressed through what we now deem unbelievable practices, offer a mirror for our own society. You might find yourself comparing their openness about sexuality to contemporary discussions, or their emphasis on divine lineage to modern concepts of inherited status. It prompts a fascinating self-reflection. Historians still argue whether our modern fascination with ancient Egypt sometimes leads to anachronistic interpretations, viewing their practices solely through contemporary ethical frameworks rather than within their own cultural context. The aesthetic impact of their unfiltered approach to depicting sexuality and life-giving forces in art also continues to captivate. You can walk into a museum today and see a statue of the god Min, or a depiction of a vibrant fertility rite, and while it might initially surprise you, it also conveys a powerful, unashamed vitality. This directness, so unlike many periods of history, speaks volumes about a culture comfortable with the body and its natural processes. It's a quirky tidbit that a civilization so ancient can still feel so remarkably modern in its comfort with certain aspects of human experience. Ultimately, by embracing the entirety of their world, including the parts that challenge our sensibilities, you gain a richer, more authentic appreciation for ancient Egypt. It moves beyond the simplistic narratives of curses and tombs to reveal a complex, intelligent, and deeply spiritual people. You come to understand that their unbelievable practices were not random eccentricities but logical extensions of a coherent worldview, one that saw the divine in the very act of creation and the continuity of life. So, as the ancient sands slowly settle, remember that the secrets of the Nile are not just buried beneath the earth. They are etched into the very fabric of Egyptian belief, waiting for you to uncover them, piece by fascinating piece. You've just concluded a fascinating dive into the intricacies of ancient Egyptian beliefs, understanding how their unbelievable practices are key to unlocking the Nile's enduring secrets. Now, as the final grains of sand settle on our journey, let's bring it all together by emphasizing the profound, multifaceted impact of their unique worldview, particularly how it informed their complex relationship with the very forces of life and regeneration. You'll realize that their legacy isn't just in stone, but in the echoes of their extraordinary philosophical depth. Imagine standing on the banks of the Nile at dusk, the ancient land breathing history around you. What you've learned tonight about pharaohs emulating divine incest, about the sacred link between royal virility and national prosperity, about the expectation of eternal orgasm, and about the surprising agency of women all coalesce into a picture far richer and more nuanced than any initial glimpse might suggest. This is a mainstream historical fact. The ancient Egyptians possessed a deeply integrated worldview where religion, governance, and daily life, including intimate practices, were seamlessly intertwined, all driven by a profound understanding of cycles, renewal, and cosmic order. It's like discovering that every cog in a vast, intricate machine serves a specific, vital purpose, and only by understanding each one can you truly grasp the whole. The unbelievable aspects of their sexual practices were not deviations, they were cornerstones of their belief system. They didn't see these acts through a lens of human morality as we might today, but as sacred reenactments, ensuring the perpetuation of Ma'at, the divine order and balance of the universe. For you, the pharaoh, engaging in these unions was a profound act of worship, a living prayer for the prosperity of your people and the continuity of life itself. This cosmological imperative elevated private acts to matters of state, underscoring the absolute uniqueness of their kingship. Historians still argue whether the common populace fully embraced the divine justifications for royal incest, or if they simply accepted it as part of the pharaoh's mysterious, untouchable nature. The inherent optimism of their civilization, rooted in the predictable cycle of the Nile flood and the promise of rebirth, permeated every aspect of their lives, including their approach to sexuality. They didn't shy away from the life-giving forces of the body. They embraced and celebrated them, seeing them as integral to existence, both mortal and immortal. You might find this perspective a refreshing change, a contrast to cultures that have historically veiled such matters in shame or secrecy. It's a quirky tidbit that their profound reverence for life extended so completely that it sought to ensure even the capacity for procreation continued into the eternal afterlife. Ultimately, by confronting and understanding these seemingly bizarre customs, you move beyond mere fascination and gain a profound respect for the ancient Egyptians' sophisticated thought. They built a society of incredible resilience and longevity, fueled by a worldview that was both practical and deeply spiritual, scientific and mystical. You realize that their solutions to the challenges of power, succession, and prosperity were intricately tied to their unique understanding of the human body's role in the divine cosmos. Now, as the ancient sun sets on our journey through the unbelievable practices of the pharaohs, let the echoes of their complex, vibrant world gently fade. Remember the pharaoh, the living god, whose most intimate acts held the fate of a nation in balance. Feel the warmth of the desert air and the quiet flow of the timeless Nile, carrying secrets and stories into eternity. Rest assured that the mysteries of ancient Egypt, though profound, are slowly, beautifully, unraveling piece by fascinating piece, even as you drift into dreams. Sweet dreams.